Callum's hit record, so I'll just say Nikita Koloff, welcome back. It's a pleasure.
It is always great to be with you guys, and love talking to all the fans in the UK and all abroad and around the world, all of your audience. Just an honor to be here. Thank you, guys.
Oh, it's our pleasure. It's our pleasure. I know I said last time I'm a huge old school NWA fan, so me speaking to you, this is a dream. So I mean, to get you back on again, it's fantastic. It really is.
Seriously, when we were making a list recently about the people we want to get back on the show, the top of Jamie's list was Nikita. So
it was. It's a pleasure.
Well, and I'm honored by that. I mean, I really am, and I mean that sincerely. Of course, I've got roots. I think we probably talked last time. I've got some roots to the UK, and
you do, yes.
Yep. United Kingdom. My family from between England, Ireland, and Scotland, and other parts of Europe, but heavily concentrated in the United Kingdom. So,
well, it's our pleasure. But I know last time we spoke about so many things, and there's so many things that we wanted to talk about we didn't get around to. And I wanted to start with War Games. You was it the first War Games you was in?
It was, yeah. And when I'm asked about the War Games, I mean, it ranks right up there with one of the highlights of my career. And when I think back and recently I was asked in an interview about, what AEW is doing, kind of, trying to, in a sense, or whether you want to say reinvent it or bring it back. There's nothing like the original, in my view. I mean, no matter whether it's a movie or a War Games wrestling match or anything, the match beyond or anything else, there's just nothing like the first of something, right? Yeah. And so when I think back on that very first War Game, myself, Dusty, the Road Warriors, Paul Ellering, Four Horsemen, James J. Dillon, I can remember that night and just how electric it was in the building. The fans, anyone who goes back and would watch that and just pay attention, much as you're watching the action in the ring or rings in this case, pay attention to fan reaction because they set the tone for the whole night, really for the whole match. And so like I said, it ranks right up there with one of the top. And later on, I do the War Games with Sting's Squadron, and that was a who's who of wrestling, right? Steve Austin, Arn Anderson, and others in that one, right? Ricky Steamboat, etc. But that first one brings back great memories.
What was your first thoughts as well when it was brought to you about the War Games, when you first heard about this creation? Because was it a Dusty creation?
It was. I mean, Dusty was a creative genius, I feel, and when it comes to wrestling stories and angles and finishes, and that's all that encompasses. One as a wrestler, also as a booker and an agent. He was just brilliant, in my view, in my personal view, and so the unexpected. Again, going back to that very first one. Nobody knew what to expect. Nobody knew how it was going to turn out, how the fans would respond. But I think a tribute to it is the fact that AEW is trying to mimic it, right? Or to bring it back around. So a great tribute.
Even back when you were in this first War Games match, was there anything which said to you, like, this is going to be a match which is still going to be loved and respected so many years later? Did you think this match type would catch on, or did you think it'd be a one and done kind of stipulation?
Well, it's interesting because we actually ended up, we did the match beyond, and then we did basically a whole tour with them, right? In several cities, and so which was evidence that the people loved it, and that it would have some longevity. Again, did I know all these years later it would be repeated? No, I wasn't really thinking of that at the time, but I do recall thinking, the fans are really, if you want to say, really digging this match, and which warranted doing a whole tour with them. So yeah.
That's cool. Really cool. And like you said, you were in that first one. Nobody can ever take that away from you. You look at the history books, you're right there in the first ever match. That's incredible.
It is. And there was, for me personally, there was a lot of firsts for me. And in fact, depending on regardless of when you air this interview, the day we're doing it today is a historical day, because I believe it was 36 years ago today that Uncle Ivan Kolov and the Russian Nightmare that we defeated the Rock and Roll Express for the World Heavyweight or the World Tag Team titles 36 years ago today. Wow. As of this interview. Yeah.
Awesome.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. I mean, Rock and Roll Express, still on the go. What was it like working with those guys?
It was a night off. They were consummate professionals, very willing to, to work with us and our style of wrestling, Uncle Ivan and I, and again, had great ideas that only added to the continuity of the match. And it wasn't like Ivan and I were just trying to take control of the whole thing. I like to think back, and I like to say or feel like any match I was involved in, or Ivan and I or anyone else, but especially Ivan and I or even myself as an individual, my goal was what was best for the fans. And so how can we work together to give the fan the best possible match that they would enjoy, regardless of the outcome? And that was kind of my attitude, or my perspective going into each and every match, including working with the Rock and Roll Express. And so those guys were so easy. They were like a night off working with those guys.
And does it surprise you that, they're still going now, aren't they, as well? They're still recently been in the NWA.
They are. They're in independence. In fact, I'm managing a couple of guys I christened as Kolov Dynasty, Alexander and Neil Koloff. I christened them with that name, with the Koloff name and Kolov Dynasty. They had a match. Had a match last year against Rock and Roll Express, where I stood in their corner. Wow. And we'll probably have another one or two upcoming here sometime in the future against them. And so it's kind of like deja vu, right? Where Kolov Dynasty gets together. And kudos to Ricky and Robert. The fact that they can still go and still perform and, give the fans an entertaining match. Now, truthfully, they're not as young and nimble as they once were. No. However, they're still able to go in and perform and give the fans a great match. So kudos to them. That's like Sting. Somebody asked me in a recent interview about Sting getting back in the ring. I'm like, well, my hat's off to him. He's 11 days younger than me. But I have no desire of ever putting the tights back on again. So just for the record.
Some of the stuff that Sting's doing in AEW is jumping off the top rope onto the outside, and he's doing flips and stuff, Canadian destroyers, and it's like I don't know how he does it. I don't think I could do that at my age, and I'm half his age. I don't get how Sting's still doing it.
Well, and I know being we have a friendship on a very deep and personal level, and I know his, and we're very similar in sense of in our mindset, in our attitude when it comes to taking care of our bodies and working out, exercising, eating right. So we're very similar in that way, and so knowing his work ethic, I'm not surprised that he's still able to do some of that, while at the same time I have said to him, bro, be careful, because look, wrestling's not an exact science. It only has to take, what you'll land wrong one time and you blow out a knee, or, as we saw in WWE where he injured his neck. I mean, it only has to take, it only has to take one mishap and something more serious happens. So my hope and my prayer for him is that doesn't happen, that something doesn't happen, at his age. But again, hats off to him, man, for getting in there and doing it.
What's your thoughts as well? I'm mentioning Sting and AEW. What's your thoughts on how they're utilizing a lot of the legends? I mean, you've got Tully there, you've got Arn there, Jake Roberts is there. I mean, what's your thoughts on how they're utilizing those guys?
I think it's wise. I think there's wisdom in what they're doing. In fact, I just talked to Tully the other day. Had a great conversation with him, and lining up, as I think you guys know, got my own podcast, the Man Up Show, and so I'm lining up Tully for an interview for the podcast, and but in our conversation, I complimented him on his opportunity to be able to be there, and to really address that question. The fact that when I said they're wise and using some wisdom and bringing guys like Arn Anderson, Tully, Sting, I mean, guys who have proven themselves in the wrestling business and who have great psychology, old school psychology that they can interject into this new brand of wrestling. I think it really is smart on their part. And then for those guys to be able to groom some of these younger guys. I did an autograph signing at a Comic-Con recently, and next door to me in the booth next door was young Darby, Sting's protege.
Right. Yeah.
And so I kind of busted his chops about Steve a little bit, but at the same time, told him, he's very fortunate to have a guy like Sting in his corner that he can be learning and gleaning from. And my hope is, because this is always a challenge with a new breed, younger guys, they don't always, I find, respect older guys or show them the respect that they deserve.
Yeah.
And so these younger guys would caution not to get so pious and become, in a sense, a prima donna and thinking, you're not going to teach me anything, or I already know everything. I don't need to learn anything from you. So anyway, that's my answer to your question.
If you could go to let's say AEW gave you a call and said, hey, look, we want you to come in and manage absolutely any singles wrestler or tag team that we've got, is there anyone in AEW who you think could benefit from the tutoring of Nikita Koloff?
I mean, I would. My short answer would be yes. I would like to think that there would be. Looking back on my career and many of the superstars of wrestling that I had the opportunity to be in the ring with. Now I'm going to go back to some classic wrestling legends, like for example, Dory Funk Jr., Blackjack Mulligan, Wahoo Mcdaniel, Rufus R. Freight Train Jones, Bam Bam Terry Gordy. I mean, there's some guys that I was Johnny Weaver, who was huge in the Mid-Atlantic region, and guys who had classic wrestling styles that I was able to step in the ring with and learn from myself. The other part of that answer I want to say is this: I'd be interested in potentially doing that, but I'd be more interested, as I've already referenced, I'd be more interested bringing in Kolov Dynasty to take on some of those tag teams that they have, and feel like, because of my history with Dusty as the Superpowers and Cody and Dustin's involvement with AEW, that there could be some actual storylines.
Yeah, definitely.
that could be created between the Koloff and the Rhodes family. But that is, yeah, I mean, who knows? Stranger things have happened in professional wrestling, right? Who knows?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm already fantasy booking in my head the Kolov dynasty and FTR with you in one corner, Tully in the other corner.
Or War Games.
Yeah.
War Games, and people, the fans, they follow me on social media, right? Instagram, Twitter, are commenting from time to time, and they're tagging Tony Khan, and I've heard that mentioned, Tully's team, with Tully in the corner, and then Kolov Dynasty with me in the corner. And again, because of my history with Tully, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's history there with the Four Horsemen. There's history with me and Arn. I mean, so there would seem to be some natural storylines that could pull in not only the present day audience and wrestling crowd, but even some of the more, older school fans that would probably eat that up and love to see it. But for whatever reason, they haven't shown an interest in that to date. But who knows? Just like I said, stranger things have happened.
Yeah, well, I would love to see that as an old school fan. That'd be something I would pay very good money to see.
I think one thing AEW is really good at doing is respecting wrestling history. So if that did happen, I'm sure they would reference everything about your history and why you are managing that tag team. I trust AEW to do that really well. So that would be cool.
Well, and we've told the story there, and I don't know if I may or may not have mentioned it last time, but the storyline with Neil and Alexander is that these guys had an already successful career in wrestling on the independent circuits and with some of the other organizations, and just like Nikita Koloff was born in the hallways of Charlotte in 1986, Ivan Koloff was born into wrestling in the 1960s, and actually preceded by Dan Koloff in the 1930s.
Wow.
So the Koloff, and he was from Bulgaria, but people go research Dan Koloff, and he had an amazing worldwide career in professional wrestling. And so you think so that's part of the story, right? You got the Koloffs in the 30s, the 60s, the 80s, and now in this era, and which is why I felt Alexander and Neil were well deserving, I will say, of being christened with that name and carrying on the legacy of the Koloffs into the future and creating a dynasty, if you will, which is why we named them that.
I love it. I've just wrote down in my little notepad Dan Koloff, so I'm going to research after this.
Yeah.
I love all that, the history of the business and that, so I'm going to be having a good research tonight. One of the names you did mention, though, going back a minute ago, because I actually wrote in my notes to mention this guy, because we've never spoke about him, and I'd love to know a bit about him. You mentioned Wahoo Mcdaniel. What was it like working with him? Because I've heard people like Ric Flair say he was one of the toughest people he's ever been in the ring with. What was it like for you?
Tough guy. I mean, let's put it this way. Flair was famous for his chops, but Wahoo was famous for his chop, right? The tomahawk chop, the Indian tomahawk chop. Yeah. And I will say this: if you wrestle Wahoo Mcdaniel, you are going to get chopped. That's not even debatable. You will get chopped. You will feel those chops. And I think it was his objective or his goal every time he wrestled somebody was to leave his handprint on your chest. I think that was Wahoo's goal. And a very stiff competitor, and that's kind of tongue in cheek, right? Meaning he worked a very snug style, as did I, so I appreciated that. I did not have a problem with that, and I was very fortunate to have him, put me over when we did. I was the U.S. heavyweight champion.
You had the unification match.
Unification match. He was national heavyweight champion. I think in Atlanta we unified those belts. He was gracious enough, to put me over in the center of the ring, which with his legendary career was a great honor for me. And And I'll mention this too, going back prior to his wrestling career, because you said you don't talk a whole lot about him. Maybe people that don't know a whole lot about Wahoo, he had a professional football career prior to his wrestling career. That's actually where he got the nickname Wahoo, was because of how tough he was on the football gridiron. Now we're talking about American football, just for your UK audience there, not the other kind of football. Talking about American football. But and my understanding is back in those days, he played defense. I think it was a linebacker. When he'd make a tackle, the stadium announcer would say, who was in on the tackle? Guess who? And like the whole entire stadium would say Wahoo, and guess who? Wahoo. And so, and one last little footnote on that. The reason he left professional football and went full-time in wrestling was in those days, pro football players didn't make but peanuts. I mean, table scraps compared to what these guys make now. He actually made more money part-time in the off season in wrestling than he did in football. And so he said, this is crazy. I'm just going to quit football and go wrestle full-time. I'll make 10 times the money. So he did.
Why not? Why not? That, speaking of, obviously, you mentioned Wahoo, you had a unification match. You won the US title. I mean, there was the best of 7 with Magnum, which I get goosebumps thinking about it because I love it. But what was it like working with Magnum? Because obviously there were big plans for Magnum, wasn't there, before his accident?
He was like 4 days away from flying to New York and inking a deal on becoming the world heavyweight champ.
Yeah.
So he was being groomed. He was being groomed to be, take Flair's spot, be the next, the next top babyface on the planet. And he had the look, he had the charisma, he could carry the you, and he could in the ring, and so matched up very, very well in that. And I've had fans say many times, it's the most talked about of my career is the best of 7. It's the most talked about. And I've had fans say, that night they're in the arena, they're walking out and saying to one another, I don't know about any of these other matches, but that match with Nikita Koloff and Magnum TA was real. That match was real, you know. But that's what Terry and I wanted to personify. And in those days when it was a very protected business and not known as, quote, sports entertainment, our goal every night was to bring so much believability to the match that is what the fan would walk out saying. And so I take that as a real compliment from the fans, and that we achieved our objective. And I like to think two thoughts. One, had he won the world title, him and I probably would have went back and forth for that belt like we did for the US belt for years to come. Secondly, had he not had the wreck, this is a what if right here. Yeah. This is a what if, right? What if Terry had not had the wreck? Would Nikita Koloff have become a babyface? That's the question, right?
Yeah.
Chances are I may not have ever become a babyface had he not had the wreck.
Your whole career could have looked very different. Like, that is a huge what if. There's a very big question.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Now, obviously, we're not going to go back and change history. I mean, what happened. But the number one most hated guy in wrestling at that point, at that moment. I mean, it is still the Cold War era. Yeah. And again, who knows? Maybe that still might have happened, but it might have happened 2, 3, 4 years down the road. Who knows? We'll never know for sure, right? But that would have been a strong possibility that I like Ivan had a heel run the majority of his career, that I may have been predominantly the baddest of the bad and most hated for years to come.
Did you want a babyface run? Was you ready for a babyface run?
Honestly, bro, I was too young to even know. I mean, I was still green, still wet behind the ears. I was still green. Because, keep in mind, I'm only a couple of years into my career.
Yeah.
I mean, about 2.5. I'm about 2.5 years into my career. And so when Dusty Rhodes and Jimmy Crockett approached me with the idea, what do I know? I'm still 2.5 years old. What do I know? And I'm looking at two guys one who had a storied career already in wrestling, and the other who had a storied career in promoting wrestling.
Yeah.
So I just, in blind faith, you might say, or just stepped out and trusted their judgment, and stepped into that role. Now, I did find out, and here years later, somebody had asked Dusty. They were traveling on the road and say, "Hey, I have just a random question for you. When the night, when Nikita turned, did any of you guys know that it would get over the way it did, be as huge as it was?" And his answer was, "No clue. We knew it was a roll of the dice to turn some hot Russian heel babyface. We're grateful that it turned out the way it did, but no, nobody had any idea that it would turn out the way it did."
Yeah, I still remember. I've seen it many times. The reaction from the crowd, it's still one of the best reactions. It's a goosebump moment for me every time you watch it. It must have been the same for you.
Absolutely. It was the word I use now is surreal. Looking back on it, surreal. I mean, legitimately, I know and I'm not exaggerating. I don't feel at all I'm exaggerating this. After the 1, 2, 3, J.J. Dillon scoots out of the ring, and Dusty and I are in the cage, and partly led by his antics. I mean, fans were chanting my name for at least 10 minutes, at least. Now, part of that was Flair coming down to the ring and us engaging and getting those camera angles and footage, setting up the future. But to be there and hearing them chant your name, for that long was, certainly surreal, to say the least. Yeah.
Amazing. Now, I know we've only got about 10 minutes left before Zoom cuts off, so I don't want to keep you too much longer, but we've mentioned the Horsemen. What was it like being around the Horsemen? Because you hear stories that they lived that life. I mean, it wasn't a gimmick, was it, with the Horsemen?
Yeah. Well, and one little quick footnote on regarding the turn as well, because it involved the Horsemen, so it ties in. Mm-hmm. Tony Schiavone, I did confirm that Tony Schiavone had been asked in all of his wrestling careers, an announcer, what was the biggest pop? You made reference to the fan reaction. What was his biggest pop that he witnessed ever in wrestling? And he is on record of saying, which again, I'm very honored, the night Nikita turned was the biggest pop. And I take that as a huge compliment, knowing all of the historical matches Tony Schiavone has witnessed, right? And so, Tony, shout out to you. Thank you, sir, for that huge compliment. Leading into the road, the Horsemen, being around the Horsemen. I mean, they lived, ate, and breathed their gimmick, right? I mean, told you I was talking to Lex earlier today. In fact, we've got a next week from this filming. Next week, he and I will be in Royston, Georgia, co-facilitating another man camp that he and I do, ministering and we teach, train, empower, and equip men to step into to be a man, to be a man. That's why it's called Man Camp. So he and I will be together. But from time to time, we reminisce on our careers and certainly, with the friendship we have, and certainly talk about the whole Horseman run, dropping the U.S. title to him in a cage in Greensboro.
Yeah.
And you could not go into the ring. In my view, you could not go into the ring, whether it was a single match, a tag match, a 6-man, or an 8-man tag, like many times the Road Warriors and Superpowers against the 4 Horsemen had, or War Games. You could not go into a match and as far as I'm concerned, have a bad match against any combination of those guys. Arn Anderson in a single match, Tully Blanchard, Lex Luger, Ric Flair, any combination of a tag or a single, you're going to have a great match. You're going to walk out having given the fans their money's worth and walk out with a great. Now, outside the ring, they lived up to that reputation too.
Yeah,
high flying, limousine riding. Woo! Yeah, that's exactly what they did. They lived it outside the ring as well.
I'll tell you what, before we do go, you mentioned obviously Tony Schiavone. You hear people mention Jim Ross, Gordon Soley, but Tony Schiavone is one of the greatest of all time. Do you not think?
There's so many good ones. He is. Yeah, I mean, JR, I think, has done a phenomenal job. I can look back, Gordon Soley is kind of, in my view, maybe the grandfather of announcing, right?
Yeah,
but, Mean Gene Okerlund, who, by the way, we graduated from the same high school, for those who don't know that.
Wow.
Mean Gene was a few years ahead of me. Vern Gagne was a few years ahead of me, but also graduated from Robbinsdale High School. But yeah, Tony Schiavone, one of the best, and JR right there with him, side by side. And but been a lot of great announcers over the years.
Yeah, it's great to see them back together in AEW.
It is so cool.
Yes,
it really is.
So cool.
It is.
Absolutely. Full circle, right?
Full circle. That's it. Absolutely, yeah. But
Jesse Ventura, another good color guy, commentary guy.
Yeah. So Jesse Ventura.
Anyway.
Before it cuts off as well, I mean, is there anything you want to promote and plug yourself, Nikita?
Man camp.
Yeah, I would ask, go to go to Kolov.net, go to Kolov.net. You can connect with me on social media. You can connect. You can find out more for the guys out there. You can find out more, and the ladies, find out more about Man Camp, what Lex and I are doing with Man Camp. You can connect to my podcast, the Man Up Podcast, right through the website. You can link right to my podcast. Got some incredible interviews with a lot of the wrestling guys and many others as well. I'll make sure you guys get all the links so that, you post them in your show notes and all the links as well. Go and on that website, Kolov.net is my store with 2 of the books I've written and many other things that are available there on the store, and getting ready to launch a television version of the radio show and podcast called Man Up TV. Getting ready. Yeah. In fact, tomorrow I'm going to film the first episodes for that. And there'll be a link on my website to how people can dial into the Man Up TV show, along with the radio show and the podcast. So a lot of great things going on, guys. I appreciate you guys having me on.
Oh, absolutely. Anytime. It's always a delight talking.
Nikita. And I feel like there's more to talk about. So, I mean, hopefully maybe in the new year we can get you back again and then chat some more.
Absolutely. I'm always honored to be with you guys. You guys are wonderful. To all your fans, all your audience out there, man, thank you. Thank you for being such loyal, long-standing wrestling fans, man. You guys sincerely are the best of the best on the planet. English football, American football, baseball, basketball, hockey. I don't care what the sport. As far as I'm concerned, wrestling fans are the greatest on the planet. Hope to see you out there at an autograph signing, Comic-Con, Legend signing, somewhere on this podcast or somewhere else. God bless each and every one of you. God bless you guys. Thank you.
And you too.
And you too, Nikita. We'll see you again soon. You take care.
All right, guys. Thank you. Bye-bye.